Welcome to the N Squared TechEd 2009 Europe channel, which I guess this is becoming now. And guest this afternoon is Brian Keller.
How you doing, Neil?
Good to see you again.
You too. You too.
It's funny, you always seem to bump into you at conferences.
Around the world, yes, that's true.
And occasionally in Redmond.
Yeah, once in a while.
Yeah. So why are you here? What's exciting that you're talking about and doing?
Well, so a lot of people know me as a Visual Studio Team System evangelist,
Right.
and traditionally Microsoft with Visual Studio has focused on the developer, right? Mm-hmm. Occasionally the architect, sometimes the high-end tester specialist, but by and large, it's a development tool.
Yeah.
With 2010, what we're really doing is we're expanding our audience to address what we refer to as the generalist tester. So if you look at, you've probably seen this, if you look at the typical organization, we find that about 70% of the testing that still takes place today, it's still manual testing.
Right. There's like a spreadsheet of tasks that need to be done, and
exactly.
you kind of try and walk through those and see whether the program does it correctly.
Exactly. And it makes sense, right? Because applications, especially early on in the iterations, they're changing so fluidly that it doesn't make sense to invest in test automation. You can have your unit tests, but to have automated tests that click through the application and do GUI testing, that can be expensive. It can be very fragile, right?
And some of that stuff, to be fair, is not stuff that you can, how do you automate that this GUI is intuitive?
Sure, that's true.
Right. So.
Or that everything's spelled correctly. Sometimes you Brits spell things wrong.
Right.
So,
yeah,
it's tough to.
Yeah,
I've
heard that. I don't think it's us, but
yeah. Oh, whatever. That's
you
another video.
The lazy letters.
Exactly. You say lazy, I say redundant. Yeah. So anyway, manual testers have been traditionally underserved by the market. There's not a lot of tool vendors, and Microsoft is guilty here, that we do not really address manual testers. Like you said, they're still using spreadsheets. They're still using Word documents. They're lucky if they're integrated with a bug system like Team Foundation Server. So what we've done with Visual Studio 2010 is we first built a tool that's dedicated towards those testing teams.
So are you saying they're not going to load Visual Studio, they're going to load this other tool?
Right. Let's be honest. You're not going to walk up to a generalist tester and say, hey, we want you to test software using Visual Studio, plop it down on their desk, it's a 747 cockpit. That's overwhelming. So
well, you've just made me a lot happier.
Good.
I was really scared there that I was going to have to start telling, testers who are not technically inclined really, and they're certainly not developers.
Right.
Hey, there's this great new tool you can run. It's called Visual Studio. They're like, yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have a tool called Microsoft Test and Lab Manager. Mm-hmm. It's all, to be fair, it's all part of the Visual Studio brand, but it's a WPF based client. And it's specifically for creating my test cases, organizing my test cases, managing my test plan, authoring the steps that go into a test case, and then there's a tool within there called Microsoft Test Runner that helps me execute my tests. So it gives me the list of all the steps. It helps me go through my test iterations. Cool stuff like you can parameterize your test cases to say, let's run once using Neil's username and once using Brian's username, and all that stuff automatically just appears for the tester. They can report the status, they can file bugs, and what's really amazing about this whole experience, and the reason that developers should care, TechEd's a developer conference, it's not a tester conference, but when developers see this, their eyes light up, because what traditionally happens when a tester comes to you and says, I have a bug?
I say, okay, what is it? How do you reproduce it?
Exactly. Well, first you probably say, no, you don't. It works on my machine. I don't believe what you're talking about. But once I convince you, that I'm not leaving your office until you actually talk to me, then you say, how do I reproduce it, right? And one of the major challenges is that organizations oftentimes resolve bugs as no repro because they don't have enough information. Or they go to the other extreme and they tell testers, anytime you find a bug, I need you to fill out this 15-page document. I need you to text screenshots. And as a tester, I find a bug. Maybe I'm not going to file it after all.
It's not so bad, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we want to make that a seamless experience for the tester. So what we've done with the Microsoft Test Runner is while you're running through those tests, we can gather simple stuff like what build are you running, what's the system information, are you running Internet Explorer 8, what version of Firefox might you be testing with. All that information can be collected off of your client machine, off of the servers you're running up against. We can also collect event viewers, or event logs rather, and even a new debugging capability called IntelliTrace. and IntelliTrace allows you to kind of go back in time through your debugging stack, and you can rewind and say,
show me. You can actually see what the memory looked like for like 10 seconds before the crash happened.
Exactly. You can
That's
say, okay, right before this exception was called, we entered this method, and when we entered this method, we passed these values into the method. It's amazing. I think it's going to revolutionize.
So that's kind of like a stack trace. Do you get any kind of idea of what the memory consumption was like of your application? So, you know, sometimes it only happens when you load up a big image or something. So it would be worth knowing that there's this memory consumption, the heap is looking something like that, or is that kind of too low level for that tool?
Well, so that's not included by default, but what you can do is you can actually author your own custom data diagnostic adapters, is what we call them, and then those can be included when you run your tests. So let's say that you find that as a developer that information would be really helpful for you.
Right.
You go to the test lead and say, hey, I want you to actually run with this custom data diagnostic adapter I authored. They drop that on all their testing machines, and then that can anytime they find a bug, include information about what did the memory.
So how would I build that? Is that just like a DLL that plugs into?
It's a DLL. We've got interfaces that you could subscribe to. If you go to the MSDN documentation today, we actually have an example that shows exactly how to do that type of diagnostic adapter.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else, I guess one of the things I'm very excited about is, and I have been for a long time, is the test-driven development.
Sure.
So is there more stuff in VS 2010 for that agile type developer that wants to drive their development from the test first? Can we do things, and not just from unit tests, but can we do things like build out skeleton tests, end-to-end tests within maybe the test runner tool, this new test runner tool, that then we try and fill in? Is that an option? Is that something you guys have thought about?
So the end-to-end is not really something where we're at today, but where we're at is you can write your test first now. You can write your unit test first, and then you can populate your code steps from your unit test. So if I write my unit test to say, I want to call an add function, int x, int y are the variables we're going to pass into it. I can write my test logic, and then I could say generate my test, or generate my development code, my application code behind that.
Right.
In Visual Studio 2005 and 2008, you can do the reverse today, which is say generate my unit test harnesses.
Which is always backwards for me, right?
Exactly. Absolutely understand the TDD lifestyle, and so what you can do now is you can write your test first and then generate your application code. The other really cool thing that we've done, which might be interesting for you, is let's say that you've got a suite of 1,000 unit tests. Well, as a TDD developer, you should probably run those unit tests every time you make changes to your code.
Right.
What we've done, though, is we've implemented what's called test impact analysis. Test impact analysis runs against managed code while you're executing your test, be it a manual test or a unit test, and it tells you which methods actually get executed each time you run an individual test.
So it's kind of like a coverage tool. It's showing
it's very similar to code coverage.
Right.
Exactly. But what's powerful here is that you can make a change to one section of code, and rather than have to run all 1,000 of those unit tests, we can give you a window that says, these are the 30 impacted tests. Just run these tests, and those are the only ones you need to run.
Awesome. So it gives it... And could we get that, identified within a suite or something, so we can just say just run that suite, or you just push a button and it just runs those tests?
Yeah, so basically what you do is you say run impacted tests, and then it runs those 30 tests, and you're good to go.
And to get that, Visual Studio 2010, is it going to be only in certain SKUs, professional and above?
I know it's in premium and ultimate. I don't know if it's in professional. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey,
That's
thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks, Brian. Cheers.